Hi, I'm Googs Mingo. Uh, I was born in 1934, and my first memory of life in Little Falls is I was in the Dog Buggy Parade. Ginger Sauer, who lived at the house, was in the band ahead of me, and they told me just follow Ginger, and I did. The band and I took off, and the rest of the Dog Buggy Parade didn't. The next thing I remember was the day I was going into second grade. It was a split classroom, and Phil Randall was going into grade 1, and I was going into grade 2. And he turned to Sister Mary Frances Catherine and said, "Be good to Googs because her dad just left today to go in the army." And I looked at Phil and said, I didn't say anything. I had never heard that. In the years 1942 to 1946, when Dad was gone, I roamed Little Falls all by myself. Jim was in daycare, Nora wasn't. Grandpa and Mona ran the house, and Mother ran the insurance agency and came home to cook. I roamed Maple Island with Gay Goblish, the library with Mary Ike, and the John Drews, we roamed the golf course. Grandpa tutored me in multiplication tables and my spelling and taught me to play cards. Aunt Mona read me the funnies on Sunday and taught me to read. Dad came home in the spring of 1946. First of all, he was on a troop train from Seattle that came through, and the troop train stopped at slowed down in every little town from Seattle to Fort Snelling so people could see him, and everybody was out the window waving. We were down there, Uncle Wallace held Jimmy, and I held Mom's hand, and we waved madly at all these soldiers, knowing Dad was one of them. 2 weeks later, I came home from school for lunch, and there was Dad in the front, and all the family was out in front, and everybody was celebrating and kissing and hugging, and someone said, "Where's Jim?" No Jim. Uncle Walt and Uncle Joe went tearing around the neighborhood and found Jim. Dad and Mom said the next day was going to have a day off. So we all got up the next morning to have a day off, and I was getting ready for breakfast. I was having breakfast, and the phone rang. An airplane crashed at the airport, and my dad said, "I'll cover that, Maria," and grabbed the car. We settled down again, phone rang again, and they said, "The Seabucks building's burning down on the west side." Mom said, "I'll cover that," and ran out and walked over the bridge to that. The next morning, when they got that all done, Dad went to work from then on, and Mom was home with us. Next year in 5th grade, Sacred Heart Church burned down. About 6 months later, St. Francis Xavier Church burned down, and 3 months later, the school burned down. I was in 5th grade and taking the religion test, and Father Romacher said, "Stay right where you are, finish the test." And John Grimes said, "That's not legal," so we marched out, and good thing, because the fire was in the attic right above what was our classroom. The boys went to Columbia, and we went to St. Francis. The little kids went to Columbia. I had 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in 2 classrooms at St. Francis, and loved it. Walked to school, and eventually moved up and went to St. Francis for high school. I don't remember anything about Jim except that he was not at that when Dad, and our lives never were the same age. He was in grade school, I was in high school. He was in high school, I was in college. So we were ships passing in the dark. However, I remember that when Nora was there, or Nora wasn't there, she was born because I was at Camp McDonald, and I came home and there was a new baby. When Mary was born, I was a babysitter for everybody in the neighborhood, and I came home one night and told Mom, I can't get along in high school. I have to have more time to study. And she said, "Good, because we're going to have a baby here." And a few months later, I came out of a retreat of St. Francis, and they said, your mom's in labor with the doctor, but the doctor's been with her all night, and we'll stay with her, she's fine. And I went home, and there was Mary Frances, or there was a new baby, going to be named Frances, that because she was born on Baldy's birthday. So I ran upstairs to Pat and Barry Kidder to announce the new baby, and they said, Mary Frances is a very nice name, and that was what I told Mom when we named her. The interesting thing about this birth was that Dad and Aunt Mona, or Dad and Aunt Mimi and Aunt Bunny and Uncle Walt were all down in Chicago picking up Aunt Phyllis, who had a nervous breakdown, and they were going to move her back to Little Falls. So Mom literally was alone. As far as I knew, Nora was left at Belle Prairie. Jim was being babysat by Grandpa, and I spent most of the time at St. Francis. I was very sad to leave St. Francis. I cried a lot at graduation, but I had a great summer. Mary Ike went to the public school, and so I had a lot of friends from the public school. So I did a lot of bike riding, water skiing on the river, and had many friends from the Methodist, Episcopal, and Lutheran Church, and had my first taste of ecumenism. Those friends are friends to this day. We have on trips together. I went to St. Kate's wearing nylons every day. Had a sterling silver place card at my table, and we had to wear hats when we went off campus. Mother was thrilled to death, and all that ended a year later when they got a new building. I loved St. Catherine's. I majored in sociology, or I majored in art and sociology, but volunteered at Christ Child Community Center, and met Pat, and got married in 1958. In between there, Mary and Nora did come to St. Catherine's for some weekends, and we had some good times at Como Park. And that's up till 1958, and I give it to Jim, or to Nora.
My name is Jim Randall. I was born on August 31st, 1940, at St. Gabriel's Hospital in Little Falls. My home is with my parents and my sisters. Parents were Marie Schmidt Randall and Tony Randall. My sisters were Gertrude, Nora, and Mary. We all lived at 200 4th Street Southeast, Little Falls, Minnesota. That's the house that my grandfather, Phil Sheridan Randall, bought around the turn of the century, had it finished. That became the Randall house until my parents sold it and moved into a nursing home. My grandfather never left that house, lived there all his life, died there, and was actually laid out for the wake in the living room, not at a funeral home. His oldest daughter, my aunt Aunt Ramona, after 1 year of college at St. Scholastica, lived there all her life until she moved to a nursing home. My sister Gertrude brought back a lot of memories, particularly about traveling around the area. In those days it was safe. I'll get to that, but I remember Pine Grove Park, Lindbergh Park, the golf course. And I remember Subsabian's farm and a racehorse called Blaze. The Warriors, I do not remember the day my father left, but shortly thereafter my memory kicks in. I would sleep at nights with my mother sometimes. I do remember her when I was 3 or 4 giving me castor oil and an enema, because she was a nurse and that cures everything. I remember in those days the girls' school at Sauk Center for wayward girls, but not those that needed a prison, just wayward girls, would be loaned out during the war years to women who worked and needed somebody for daycare. I can remember traveling to Sauk Center 2 or 3 times with my mother for a new daycare young woman. They came and they went. Some got let go and some ran away. There was always another one. I shared a bedroom on first floor with my grandfather all my life, actually, until I left the house and for good in about 1964. Well, he died in 1960. taught me to play chess and checkers, talked a little bit about the family history, and we shared that bedroom for the longest time. I remember when the relatives told me that my father was coming home. When I was playing that day out in the alley with Lynn Smacker. The Smackers lived a block away from us, other side of the street, and Lynn was a year older than me, and so we played together in the alley. I do remember her mother walking outside and saying, "Jim, your mother called, it's time for you to go home, your father's here." So I walked across the alley into the yard, and there was this man kind of on his haunches beneath the clothesline pole, looking at me, and he said, "Hi, son," and I remember saying, "Hi, Dad," and there was a lot of relatives there, and it was a happy time. In terms of the train, one year the train came through Little Falls without stopping. And my dad was supposed to be out with some other GIs, and Len Super had a rolled up Little Falls transcript which discussed how the price of liquor was raising. So when the boxcar came by slowly, Len Super threw the paper into the boxcar. Figured everybody would want to know that the price of liquor in Little Falls was going up. Then I do not remember the train when he came home. I do remember the year after he was home. In those days, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey had old-fashioned circuses. The trains would pull into town at 3 or 4 in the morning to unload the elephants and the animals. And Dad got us all up. I think I was had to be 5 or 6. War was over in August of 45. We went down and watched the elephants and all the animals come off the train. Then we went to the circus. I remember starting in grade school. I had been at 3 years old at the nursery school for working mothers, at 4 years old the Jack and Jill school for working mothers. That's next door to the Fortune home. And in the 5th grade, I went to Washington grade school on the north end of town. So by the time I got to the 1st grade, my classmates and I, all of whom were war babies, were veterans. I remember George Kleinsmith or Frankie Highland saying when the teacher was explaining arithmetic, "Teacher, we had all that last year." I remember the fire. I remember the St. Mary's Catholic Church, I call it, burned down because Larry Osuski and I, my best friend Moose, we went through the ruins like a lot of people and looking for pieces of stained glass. Of course, we were shooed off, then we'd come back when the shooing offer was gone. Then the grade school caught on fire a year or so later. We only had 1 day off. We ended up, the grade schoolers at the Columbia High School, which was south of us and about a block north of the fairgrounds. As my dad said, everything good happened on 4th Street. That's where a lot of my friends lived. That's where the Columbia School was. That's where St. Mary's was. And we moved back, and that was about the 3rd grade. They remodeled the school. I was in the church a few years ago at St. Mary's, stopped into the grade school to look around for old time's sake, and it struck me how low the water fountains were. I couldn't get a drink out of them. Grade school was fun. It was normal. We always had things to do. The fields across the tracks and the ice rink were always open to us in the winter. And then Moose and I took our bikes everywhere. There was, no thought about being kidnapped, although sometimes my parents might have wished that would have happened. They just said be home for dinner. So we take our 1-speed bikes, we'd bike to Pine Grove Park, bike to Lindbergh Park where we'd walk down, look for crabs, ride the Swinging Bridge. Then when we were about 10, we'd bike out to Fort Ripley. It was about 7 miles north of us. And in those days, 5 or 6 states sent National Guardsmen there in the summertime for maneuvers. It was a big deal. They always had inspection at least once a week, so that was shoeshine day. So Moose and I would throw our little kits on our bike out there with other kids, and shine shoes all morning. And we charged a half $1.75. That was the material. Everybody tipped us a buck. And most Saturdays we come home with $15 or $20 in cash, which at that time, in 1950-51, the average blue-collar guy around town was working for 90 or 100 bucks a week. So we were getting a man's salary for a while. Did a lot of biking. We were together all the time until I went away to prep school, St. John's Prep School. At one time, my parents thought I might have a vocation. As it turned out later, there was a lot of kids in Bede Hall, the minor seminary part of St. John's Prep School, where their mothers had the vocation. They just came there for the education. It was some of the finest education I've ever had. It carried me through 1 year of college and 2 years at Gonzaga later. Excellent school, and I offered all my children a chance to go there. My son Tony went there for 4 years, and Jimmy for 1. Kathy chose to stay in Little Falls, to stay in Hibbing with her mother. I picked up my driver's license when I was 15. In those days you could. I remember one day my dad said casually, "Go on down to St. Paul and get your sister at St. Kate. She's going to come home for the weekend." And it's real easy. Just get on Highway 10 and drive straight. It'll go through something called Snelling, and you keep going and you get to this St. Catherine's. And I said fine, and I found it. So we threw in some luggage and I brought her home. I did that twice. That was my first experience out of town driving. Then Nora had a horse for a year or two called Blaze. She'd have him stabled in the yard. And sometimes at night my dad would say, "Why don't you take Blaze back out to Subsabian's farm? I don't want Nora riding after dark." So I'd get on Blaze. He was very easy to ride. I'd take him south on 2nd Street till I came down even with Buzzard's estate. I'd cross Highway 10 there. That put me on Cherry Avenue. Then Cherry Avenue, about 2 miles south, was Subsabian's farm where we stabled them. After high school, of course, I worked that summer at Camp Ripley doing one thing or another, hauling trash. Then I had one good year at St. John's. I was on the track team and the wrestling team, doing fine with my studies. And for the summer, I got a job working up in Alaska for the Jesuits at a place called Copper Valley School. They were looking for volunteers, and a distant cousin of mine from Avon, who had been there before, he was in the seminary, mentioned it. So I wrote to the Archbishop of Alaska, Bishop Gleason. God led her back, "Come on up, I got a car for you in Lansing, Michigan to drive to a dealer in Fairbanks." In those days, it's funny, but it was cheaper to drive that car 4,500 miles on the Alcan than ship it on a ship all the way around the coast and up to Alaska. So Jim Conway and I picked up a brand new 59 Oldsmobile in Lansing, Michigan, and drove it about 7 or 8 days up the Alcan Highway, which then was mostly all gravel. And we got to Fairbanks, dropped off the car, and we were transported to Copper Valley School, where I did construction for a year. That summer, that winter, I met a school nurse who lived in Spokane, Washington. So I decided to transfer down to Spokane. They had a good school there in Gonzaga, so I did. Judy and I later broke up, which was smart. I was a sophomore in college, and she was a 22-year-old nurse, so she could see no future in that. But I finished up in Gonzaga, excellent school, and in 1960 they were invited to one of the first General Electric College Bowls, and I made the team. We went out to New York to the studios, either NBC or CBS, for the filming. It was on television every Sunday night. We're up against a school from out east called Fairleigh Dickinson. We were ahead at halftime, but we ended up losing. You could go back 5 times in a row if you won. So to this day, Bob Johnson and I, the captain of the team, still hate Fairleigh Dickinson.
We beat him.
Bob and I were good friends. He was a year ahead of me. I talked so much about Alaska. He went up there himself and stayed for 2 full years. He was quite a writer. He wrote an article about the school, a magazine article called When Copper Turned to Gold. Then after graduation, my dad said casually, "Do you have a job?" And I said casually, "No, I don't." He said casually, "Well, what about law school? You don't even have to practice law, but you can use it in business." Well, in those days, getting into law school wasn't quite as hard as it is today. So I took something called the LSAT, applied to the University of Minnesota. They accepted me. And I disliked law school so much, I crammed 3 years into 5. Went 1 year, dropped out for 2, came back, got my law degree. And then, that was 1967. After dropping out in 63, I got married to my girlfriend, Monica Eichton from Lindstrom. I got a job at St. Paul Fire and Marine Adjusting in Nashville, North Carolina. After 6 months with Monica and my parents pushing me to go back to law school, I bought a used 1948 Cadillac hearse. Monica filled it up with our furniture. We drove nonstop from Asheville back to Minnesota. And Gertrude found us a little apartment on Marshall Avenue, which would fit 3 rabbits if 2 of them died, but it was cheap. And we stayed there for a few months and moved over to 1801 Hague. Law school finished up in 67, then I went to Hibbing and started a career in law, 17 years as a criminal defense lawyer. And Rudy Perpich put me on the new Court of Appeals bench in 1984. I served at the court for 35 years. I still sub in. I'm the oldest judge in the courthouse, either court, our court and the Supreme Court. And they were already talking about asking me to retire at age 80. I said, let me think about it. It's been a good ride. And the foundation in Little Falls, I think about that a lot. I really do. Depending on how things go, if we hit the jackpot, I'd actually go back to Little Falls and try to buy the house back. It's been sold 2 or 3 times. The man who has it now has 0 taste. My sister Mary Frances is constantly critical of his taste, but the house is still there. It's on the historic register. So that was the foundation of my life, and a great part of it still is. Well, I should add this. There is a house called the Randall House in Westerly, Connecticut, right next door to Rhode Island. My son Tony dug out all the information. It'll get passed around in the family. My grandfather did the research and traced us back to the Lord Mayor of Bath, London in about the 16th century. 2 of his sons immigrated to America, John and Peter. And us sitting here are in a direct lineal line back to Peter. John, his brother, would be our great uncle. John Randall bought some land not too far from the coast in what's now Weatherly, Connecticut, and built a house, 17th century, 2-story wood house. And the Randalls then hated slavery, so the Randall House was on the Underground Railway. I have a picture of the inside of that house that my son Tony took. When you walk in the door, there's an old busted trap door to the left, and you can see the ladder where they would hide the runaway slaves until they were passed on to the next stop. And for that reason and others, it's on the historic register in Connecticut. So I'm kind of proud of that. And of course, my great-grandfather, Francis Voltaire, also hated slave owners, so he fought very well in the Civil War. Although at Gettysburg, he saved the life of a couple dozen of them because he wouldn't let his men fire at them when they ran away. Didn't like shooting them in the back. There was some honor in those days. All of us know that because there's a plaque out in Gettysburg which brings back to the battle, and all of my family has a copy. So I'll end it there with Gettysburg.
Hi, my name is Nora D. Randall, and I was born in 1947 in Little Falls. And I was named after my father's mother, Nora Delahunt Randall, and they wanted to name me Nora Delahunt Randall, but the priest told them they couldn't name me Delahunt because it wasn't a saint's name. So they named me Nora Diane Randall, which as far as I know is a Roman goddess. But there you Anyway, I guess really the biggest memory I have kind of is about when Mary Frances was born, because I was about 5.5 years old when she was born, and I didn't know at the time what was going on, but I know that I ended up in boarding school out at Belle Prairie with like a whole bunch of other kids, and I cried all the time. I cried and cried. I knew my mother was having a baby, and I knew that I was out at this boarding school, and there was I was in a dorm with, I don't know, maybe 20 other kids, and the thing is, I was 5.5, and I wasn't the youngest kid there. There was a kid there who was 3 years old, and she had her brother who was 4 years old, and anyway, so it was I was there. I cried all the time. I wanted the baby to be a boy, and then when they was born, they told me it was a girl, and I cried and cried, and anyway, I was fairly miserable. So, and then I went home, and there was Mary Frances. So that was kind of that was Mary Frances's my introduction to Mary Frances. But then I guess the next thing that happened was I went to school, and I can remember my mother walking me to kindergarten, which was at Charles Lindbergh Elementary School, which was 6 blocks away. So, and she walked me to school the first time because I had to cross a major street, and then after that I could kind of go on my own. And then when I started first grade, I went to St. Mary's, which was a block away. So that was not such a bad deal. Anyway, I think I got kind of a slow start as a kid because I can remember there were in our house there was my grandfather and Aunt Ramona, who lived with Dad and Mom and me and the other kids, and but also there were renters. There was Tommy and Tona Eberling and Tona's mother Jenny, who came and stayed for a while, and they lived on the 2nd floor, and they lived there quite a long time. They were there when Jim was born, and they were there when I was born, and Tona called me her little pink angel. And Tommy worked in a gas station downtown, and when he would come home at night, he would come in and he would tuck me in. And also when I went up to bed at night, I would stop off at their place. They had a radio, and I could listen to Amos and Andy on their radio before I went to bed. And the other thing is, like when I was older, like the room that I slept in was very big, and it had a light that hung down from the ceiling, and there was a string on the light. But the problem was that the light was in the middle of the room, and the room was dark. So when I was scared, I used to stand at the doorstep of the room, and I would try to see the string in the dark, and then I would knock on Mona's door, who was across the hall, and I would ask her if she would go in and turn on the light for me. So Mona would go in and turn on the light, and then I could go in. So, and also she had great things. Mona saved everything, like really everything, and she sewed. So she had boxes and boxes and boxes of wooden spools, and I could sit in her room at night and I could build castles with walls around them and cities, and she had enough spools I could have done New York. Anyway, so, and then, well, I actually, before that, I used to sleep with Grandpa downstairs, and he would also tuck me in and tell me stories at night. And one of his favorites was the bed bug story from Randall, Minnesota. And also, I think, what I remember is that when the courthouse burned down, I was sleeping with Grandpa, and we could watch the whole thing out the window of his bedroom window, because the tower of the courtroom burned down. And I think shortly after that, Grandpa actually retired, but he was in his 80s when he retired, because he was a district judge, and he would go to the courthouse. So, and the other thing I remember about living in the house is, like, growing up, is, this I'm going back now, because one of the things that happened was I wasn't very handy. There were these renters called the Kidders, and they had a kid who was younger than me, and when the kid was maybe 3 or 4, they got a little book for I don't remember her name, but she had a little book, and every page was different. On one page you could do a buckle, on one page you could do a button, and on one page you could tie a knot, like you could tie a knot so you would know how to tie your shoes. And I used to go up to the Kidders, and I would work and work and work on that thing of trying and I was like useless at it. I was the only kid in the first grade who had to stand at the teacher's desk to get my shoes tied. So, but I have to say I had a slow start in the first grade, but after that I kind of got the hang of school, and I liked it because I could be successful at it. So, because like in the house when I was growing up, it was hard. I didn't really have a place because Aunt Mona did the dishes, and she did the ironing, and she did the mending. And my mother had a cleaning lady named Lulu, and between the two of them, they were kind of like these kind of big German farm women, and they just took that house and they whipped it into shape. I can still remember the two of them going over the rug in the living room with Glamourine, and rubbing it with brushes into the rug, and then vacuuming it up, and so like they cleaned, Aunt Mona did the dishes, and Mother cooked, and so I was just supposed to be good at school, and so I was good at school, but also I wanted to help with shoveling the sidewalks. That was a thing I could do. Well, and mowing the lawn, that was another thing I could do, except I had hay fever, so that didn't go so good. But I could shovel the walks. The only problem was my mother got up every morning at 6 o'clock and went to 7 o'clock mass. So her routine was when it snowed, she would get up in the morning, she would shovel the walks, and then she would go to mass. So to beat my mother, I would have to get up at 5 o'clock, look out the window, see if it snowed, rush down and start shoveling. So when she came out at 6:30, it was done. Anyway, so then I went to school, and I got good at school. I learned how to tie my shoes. That was good. And I graduated from St. Mary's, and by the time I graduated from St. Mary's, there were a couple of us, like Mary Jo Sweeney and Louise Forci and Jeannie Felix and we were, and Kathy Madden. We were kind of the smart kids, and a little bit smart ass too. So then we went up to St. Francis, and the very first thing that happened to me when I went to St. Francis is I had my appendix removed. So I was in the hospital when everybody else started their freshman year at St. Francis, and then so I was a little late starting. But and we love St. Francis. The nuns were, they really they really, I don't know, they really wanted us to think. And so they did all kinds of different things. And we also had some lay teachers who were like amazing. And Miss Starr, who actually, she went to high school at St. Francis, and then she went and she worked in Chicago. And she came back from Chicago and she had this amazing wardrobe. We used to show up each day and kind of want to see what Miss Starr was wearing today. And one of her outfits, Sweeney called it her cut-off hatching jacket. Anyway, but she was a fabulous teacher, and she got us to do all kinds of things. We did Our Town in English class, and we read it from ladders, and we did, we had debates about whether the Romans or the Greeks were a better civilization. That was in history class, and we did a lot of things. So it was really a great education, and then we played volleyball and basketball, but that was a thing. I do have to say that one of my favorite pictures now is a picture of three of my great nieces and my great great niece, the four of them, all with their baseball uniforms, all with their mitts, because when I was 6 years old, they sent me home from Pee Wee's. I wanted to play baseball, but they sent me home because I was a girl. And then when I went to St. Francis, we could play, like the sophomores could play the freshmen and the seniors and the juniors, but we couldn't play any other school because they said girls were too emotional. And so it was and there wasn't, I believe that there was maybe a team of women who played on the west side, but I didn't know them, and we didn't go over there. So there were no team sports for women when I was growing up. Anyway, but I did grow up. And then one of the things we did one of the things we did when we were in high school is we went with two nuns. 6 of us went with 2 nuns out to Pueblo, Colorado, to teach catechism to migrant children who, and we kind of started it. I think we started at 8 o'clock, like maybe 6 o'clock in the morning, and we went to 8, and then there was mass, and then there was after mass there was from 10 to noon, and then the kids would go out in the fields to work. It was kind of a revelation because I'd never really seen people whose lives were like that, and also it was like a revelation about teaching. I did this whole lesson plan for this 2-hour class in catechism, and I went in there and I went through the whole thing in 20 minutes, and then I had all these kids, and I had like an hour and 40 minutes left. I thought I would die, but I didn't. Anyway, that was, it was an experience that really I wouldn't have had if it hadn't been for the nuns and stuff. But the other thing that happened in high school is that my mother got sick, and she actually got sick, I think, when I was maybe a freshman in high school, because one of the things that happened, or like this is, what I remember, is that my father went on a hunting trip. Now, they did take guns and they did go to a cabin in the woods, and maybe somebody shot something, but generally speaking, I think they went out in the woods and they drank and played cards and talked. But he was on one of these trips, and the doctor, Mom went to get her teeth done, and the dentist couldn't stop her bleeding, so the dentist sent her to her doctor, who was Dr. Forci, and Dr. Forci couldn't stop the bleeding, and he said, you should go to Rochester. And so I think they put her in an ambulance, and then they got the highway patrol to get Dad to tell him that she was on the way to Rochester. And I don't know this stuff firsthand, but that's what I think happened. And because this was a thing that you wouldn't tell kids. There were many things you wouldn't tell kids. And my sister Mary Frances was way better at figuring things out that nobody would tell her than I was. If they didn't tell me, I didn't get it. So, anyway, but then they came back, and they didn't tell Mary Frances and I. So that, my mother had she had multiple myeloma, which they pretty much thought at that time was kind of, they could treat it for a while, but she wasn't good. They didn't think she was going to get well. And so she was in and out of the hospital and they went to Rochester every month for treatment. And so it was a thing, like she was sick, like all those, in and like better or worse or all those times, and really they didn't tell us, but everybody else in town knew. So it was kind of, and one of the things is, one of my best friends was Weedy Forchie, who was the daughter of Dr. Forchie, and they just threatened her life if she told me that my mother was sick. So anyway, so by the sophomore year in high school, I was causing enough trouble so that actually I think the high school counselor, or the person who was in Sister Elisa and Sister Dudine convinced them to tell me. So they drove me down to St. Cloud, and in the car they told me that my mother had this disease, and they apologized. They said they were sorry. I didn't know what to say. I had, it was just kind of like, whoa. So I don't remember saying anything, but anyway, after that, then I knew why she would get sick and why she would get well, and we kind of, so it was kind of a thing that was going on. And at the same time, Sweeney and I, we were kind of like, Jim had actually started it because there was a little porch on the end of Aunt Mimi's house, which is just behind ours, that Jim turned into a place that he could sleep in the summer. It was totally disconnected from the house. It had its own entrance. And Jim slept there when he was like, I don't know, maybe in the summers when he was home or something. And so when I was in high school, I would move out there. And I would move out there with the black bear skin that he brought back from Alaska for me, and a radio. And then Sweeney would come by at night, and she could just walk into my room, right? Because it had my own separate entrance, and the two of us would kind of roam around town. And we climbed the trees near the convent. We climbed the wall behind the VFW. We went to Maple Island, and we also climbed up the side of an apartment building and knocked on our English teacher, Miss Starr's window, and she would let us in, and then we would sit around and we would talk kind of ideas and books, and it was, this was kind of it went really well. I would tell my parents I was going to Mary Jo's. Mary Jo would tell her parents she was going to my house. And then one night, Mrs. Sweeney called up our house to tell Mary Jo to come home. And my mother said, well, aren't they at your house? So when I got home, all the lights were on, and there was a moment, where so we were discovered. But anyway, we did manage to graduate. It snowed on my baccalaureate Sunday, which was the end of May, and then I entered the convent. This is a thing. Dad had this deal where he would pay you $500 if you didn't drink until you were 21. And he offered it to Googs, he offered it to Jim, but when he offered it to me, I said, no way. I was entering a convent when I was going to be 18 years old. I was going to spend the summer like drinking with my friends, So we did. We had a really great summer. We drove, we partied, we drove up to, we had our licenses, and I don't remember if I might have had the Mingo's old car by then, which was fine. Every once in a while, the carburetor would go a little weird, but if you got out and you banged on the carburetor with the croquet mount, that usually you could start the car again. So, and we bombed around in that, and we had a good time, and we went to Connie Ortman's lake cottage and in Lastrup, and it was a kind of a party central, and So we had a good time, and then I entered the convent in the fall. Well, three of us entered the convent after after we sobered up. So, but anyway, I guess I missed some things in there, like my mother's funeral, and never mind. Somebody else will have to catch that. But so after I stayed in the convent about 6 months, and I had this moment, actually, in papal social thought. I thought, I can leave, and I felt like I had lost 20 pounds. And so I just went, after class I went up and I told the postulant mistress I wanted to leave, and she called my father, and I was out that afternoon. So that was kind of in February or March or something, and then all the Catholic universities were on a semester system, and only the public universities were on a quarter system. So I couldn't go to a Catholic university till fall, but I could go to the University of Minnesota in April. So I got to go to this public university, and because they didn't want me sitting around doing nothing for that long. And I had this moment. I've had a few moments in my life. When I was about 12, I had this moment where I thought to myself, I have to make decisions for myself because nobody understands me. And then when I went home after the convent, I had this moment where I thought, I have to get out now. The family is dissolving. So with this window of opportunity to leave, and I took it. So, and I went to the University of Minnesota, and then I saw an article about Webster College. Like, Jacqueline Grennan made the cover of Time magazine because she left the convent and secularized Webster College, and I wanted to go there. So I went there, and my dad went to Monsignor Caveney, and Monsignor Caveney said, if you let her go there, she'll lose her faith. And but I have to give my dad a lot of credit, because to him, I think the thing that was the most important to him was to keep the family together. And he always thought, if I try to stop her, she'll go, which was true. And so he didn't, and he actually drove me down to St. Louis, and he with a couple of friends, because there was a possibility that the Twins could have been in the World Series that year, and they were playing in St. Louis. So they went down to see the game, but then the Twins didn't make it. Anyway, I went to Webster College, and it was, and then that became the years of the anti-war movement, which I kind of got involved in with as a kind of a foot soldier. I was never any big organizer, but I came to think that actually this wasn't a really good idea. And then what did I do? Oh, well, and then I I graduated in 1970, and that was the year that the students were killed at Kent State. And we pulled the plug on our graduation ceremony, and we read a statement from Waiting for Godot about, it was very obscure, but we liked it, about, the tears of the world are a constant quantity. And then we walked out of the graduation ceremony, and I handed my degree and my diploma and my tassel to Dad and Mick, who had basically paid for. They paid for it, right? And I said, thank you very much. Now it's my turn. And I went from there to. Well, I stayed in St. Louis, I think, another year, working at different jobs, and then I went to Side Lake, Minnesota, and I rented a cabin in the woods. Well, Jim helped me do that to see if I could be a writer, and so I was writing in the cabin in the woods, and I met Adeline Patami, who was this amazing character in Side Lake, and I spent most of the time she was up at night. She called herself Potty the Pill Popper because she had so many pills, because her health was poor anyway. So we sat up at night and drank coffee and ate donuts and watched late TV and talked, and then I went from there to Canada. And Well, I went to the Bread Loaf Writers Conference which Mickey and Dad paid for, and then I got on the train in. Well, I took the bus to Canada. I got on the train in Montreal and took it across. Well, I went to Toronto first for a month and stayed with my friend from St. Louis, and then I went to Vancouver where Josie and Tim were, and Tim was a draft dodger, and they had moved to Canada. And Tim and Josie had a little baby then, Siobhan, and by the time I got there, they had two. Then they had a second child who's Braddock, and I stayed with them for a while. And well, I guess really, I never came at home, so I guess the whole end. This is the end of my life about, as an American. I left the church, I left the country, I discovered that I was a lesbian, and so that's the end of Little Falls.
I'm Mary Frances Randall. I was born January 22nd, 1953. I share a birthday with my Uncle Francis, better known as Baldy, who I didn't know was a person until he died around 1960. My earliest memory of Little Falls is filled with family memories. I was the fourth. There were a lot of people in our house, and sometimes I think about it as utter chaos. I was little, I was quiet, I was astute. So I was in on every family drama and nobody knew I was around. I was always in a corner listening. My earliest memory of Little Falls is the crib in Mother and Dad's room. I did not have a bedroom until I was 12 years old in the house in Little Falls. I had a crib in Mother and Dad's room, and the day Babe Dirks gave birth to her baby, Mother came in and said, "We have to give the crib away. The Dirkses had a baby." So I lost my crib, and I really don't remember where I slept. My clothes closet was the north porch of the den at Little Falls. Sometimes I slept with Grandpa Randall in Jim's twin bed while he was at prep school. The reason I remember that is Grandpa was old and he had a little mason jar on the side of his bed, and that's what he peed in at night, and that did stick with me as a little kid. So I do know I slept in there. Sometimes I slept with my sister Nora, but I was forever the pest, and I really pestered Nora. So my second earliest memory was of roaming, and I couldn't have been more than 3 years old. And I would take walks. One day I went to the courthouse to find my Grandpa Randall, who was a judge, and I remember crawling the stairs up to where I thought his office was, and a secretary came out and picked me up and took me to Grandpa's office and said, "Judge Randall, I think this is your granddaughter." And somebody came and got me and took me home. My second roaming at that age, the mailman brought me home. Fortunately, the mailman was my uncle, Uncle Walt Randall. So I was brought home by many people, so Mother got a leash and harnessed me to the clothesline in the backyard so that I couldn't wander and she could get the laundry done. The leash was between the poles for the laundry line, and next to it was a box elder tree that we had. And that box elder tree, to this day, box elder bugs scare the bee juice out of me. So that was a memory. As I grew up, I just remember all of the cousins and the friends. My mother's best friend was Bunny Guy, and her daughter Ellen was my age, and Bunny and Mother would put Ellen and I in the back of the station wagon, and we would go to Minneapolis, St. Paul to shop at Dayton's, have lunch in the Sky Room, and we'd get chocolate cigarettes at Fannie Farmer. And Ellen and I would pretend we were smoking on the way home with our chocolate cigarettes, because in those days our mothers did smoke. Ellen reminded me recently about Bridge Club. And our mothers were in a huge bridge club, and when they met for bridge club, there were 3 or 4 tables of bridge, and they were the loudest group of women you will ever want to meet. And Ellen told me the other day that they served silver satin white wine at bridge club, and that was the first I knew of that. But I knew that they did drink and they did smoke during bridge club because they would keep Nora and I up. They would keep Nora and I up so much that we would jump up and down on the twin beds in Nora's bedroom until the slats hit the floor, and then Mother would be up the stairs because the chandeliers were shaking in the living room to tell us to go back to bed. There are a lot of people in our house. A meal in Little Falls, Minnesota, after I was born and before Mother got sick, had Grandpa at the head of the table. He always had herring before we ate. Aunt Ramona, Aunt Phyllis, Aunt Mimi Riley, my mother, and Nora and I. One day I asked my mother as she was cooking dinner, "Why are we cooking so much?" She said, "You never know how many people are coming to dinner, Mary Frances. You always have to make extra." So to this day, much to the bewilderment of everyone in my family, I still cook a huge meal with a lot of extra. And the way I get away with it, my family is just say Jesus might be coming for dinner. But we have to have extra. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about the cousins. I am the youngest cousin of a generation. So my cousin's kids were my friends. Judy Weigel was Phyllis's daughter, and she and her brother Steve and Bill lived a block away when I was really young. And Aunt Mimi Riley lived across the yard, and she had the best cousins for me because when the Supers came home, their station wagon was full of 7 kids, and when they unloaded, I had Botsy and Alan and all of the Super kids to play with. And better yet was when Bud Riley would come home, because I got along with Randy and Phil and Maureen and Terry, and we would play and play and play. So those are really happy memories for me because there was nobody in my house my age. Grandpa was pretty old, and Aunt Ramona was pretty old, and Nora was out doing her thing, and I was kind of the tail end of this whole bunch. So I lived wherever there was a bed, I slept. And when Mother got sick, I have very, very vivid memories of that. Dad was on a hunting or fishing trip. I thought he was at Mille Lacs Lake ice fishing. The reason I thought that was because Mother came home from the dentist. She couldn't stop her gums from bleeding. She went to bed that night. She had me sleep in the bed with her. And sometime in the middle of the night, she woke up. She called Sister Emma Rita, her good friend, a Franciscan sister who was a medical technologist, told Sister what was going on. The ambulance came. She told me to call the police and tell them that Dad was at Mille Lacs Lake ice fishing, and then I was to call my Aunt Mimi Riley. And Aunt Mimi Riley came over and sat with me, and the ambulance came and got Mother. I knew Mother was sick. I didn't know what was wrong, but once a month, probably in 1963, we would go to Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and I would accompany Dad and Mother. And I was totally unsupervised during the day, and so I would play in the tunnels of Mayo Clinic because I knew about tunnels because I'd played in the tunnels of St. Gabriel's Hospital. I spent a great deal of time playing in hospitals as a young girl, as my mother was there. One memory I do have is my mother and I always kind of went around about what I was wearing because I kind of like to wear fancy things, and Mother kind of wasn't into me wearing fancy things. And I would have to ride my bicycle up to St. Gabriel's parking lot before going to school and ride my bicycle around the parking lot to make sure I wasn't wearing a can-can to school. Well, I had the can-can hidden on the next block, and after I rode around the parking lot, I went and put the can-can on and went to school. When I was really young, I was kind of a spectator, and one of my fondest memories is when Googs and Pat got married. And I wanted to be a flower girl more than I wanted anything else in the world, but it was explained to me that Pat Mingo had way too many cousins. They couldn't have that many flower girls. And so Nora and I would not be flower girls. Now, Nora did not want to be a flower girl. So Mother went out and bought simple straw headbands for Nora and I to wear to Gertrude's wedding. And that did not pass muster with me. So when everybody was really busy with the wedding planning and everybody was in the kitchen at home talking a mile an hour, drinking bourbon and planning all of this, I went on a shopping spree. I first went to Lad and Lassie and I told them I needed a dress for my sister's wedding. I picked out a beautiful organza dress with a pink underslip that was just perfect. Then I went to Family Shoe Store and I picked out white Mary Jane's with a squash heel, which was a little bit of a high heel, which was really risque back then. And then I went to the Orchid Studio of Beauty and had them do my hair. Little did I know, I charged all of this to my father because we didn't carry cash. We just had to sign a little piece of paper. All of these store owners were calling home to my mother to say, Mary Frances just came in and did this. And my mother just said, let her go, let her go. And I was beautifully groomed for Gertrude and Pat's wedding, all with my own idea. The other memory I have about shopping with Mother was we were coming back from Mayo Clinic on MEA weekend, the October before she died, and we stopped at Dayton's, and Mother sat in a chair at the bottom of an escalator and handed me a list. I was 11 years old. She handed me a list and the charger plate, the charge thing, whatever it was, and said, this is what you are to do. I had a list of items I had to purchase for my brothers and sisters for Christmas. I bought material for Aunt Ramona to make us pajamas because she made us pajamas every Christmas. I bought my own Chatty Cathy doll that Santa would bring. And I had several other items on the list, and I would bring the bags back to Mother, and she would sit and watch the bags, and she would send me out again. And this is one of the reasons that I've always been a very competent shopper. So then I'm thinking back. I kind of want to go back a little bit to the cousins. So I had many trips with many people. One of them was Franklin Ross. A dear, dear cousin of mine, was the youngest, was very close to Mother and Dad. Franklin Ross had 2 kids, and he would stop in Little Falls and pick me up for their summer vacations. And one time he took us all up to Itasca State Park, and we got to stay up there and cross the source of the Mississippi, so I got to vacation with them. I used to be able to go down to Uncle Al and Aunt Mary Schmidt's place in Minneapolis. I stayed with the Rileys in Grand Forks for one whole summer while Mother was sick. I went to visit the Supers in Bismarck while Mother was sick. Everybody kind of signed up for a week of Mary Frances because they weren't quite sure what to do with me because Mother was sick. So I didn't really know Mother was going to die. I knew Mother was sick. The day I found out that my mother was going to die was I had been kind of farmed out to my to the Lomans and the Guys and the Webbers in Little Falls on weekends, and I was at Johnny Loman's house, and Flinky Loman was a nurse, and Flinky Loman had had it. She sat me down one day and she said, you know your mother's sick. And I said yes, and she said, your mother is not going to recover from this. She is going to die. And Mother did die about 6 weeks later. But that was the first real definitive point where I knew we were going to lose our mother. Some of the memories of that time around my mother were the loving Franciscan sisters who kept me busy. At the time of my mother's death, I was with Sister Carla Prisabilla in the kitchen of St. Gabriel's Hospital making cookies. And my brother Jim, I'll never forget this, things were still a little unclear. We must have played 100 games of solitaire in the waiting room of St. Gabriel's Hospital. And one day, Alice Olson told me that I couldn't have the cards to play. Alice Olson knew Mother was really bad that day, and Jim went over and said to her, if my sister Mary Frances wants a deck of cards to play cards, she can have them. So Jim kind of always stood up for me in different areas of my life. So, talking about those things, all of my brothers and sisters were the most important part of my life in Little Falls. I spent time in their homes, I spent time with their kids, and they all had their niches. Googs was a little strict. Wasn't really keen on the fact that she didn't want me wearing nylons after Mother died. But I wanted nylons, and Monica helped me get nylons at J.C. Penney. So I did get nylons, and so we're after Mother died. So we are kind of in the throes. Nora's left for the convent, and I'm home alone with Dad. And Dad was very sad, and Dad really missed his wife, and it was a tough time for Dad. And so a lot of people in Little Falls kind of stepped up. Helen Lateral gave me my 12th or 13th birthday party, and she bought me an inflatable hanger so I could do my own hand washing. And Dodie Earl made sure I had deodorant and other feminine things that girls needed. She worked at Mutual's drugstore. And Loretta LaFond owned the dress shop, and she was happy to make sure that I had the proper wardrobe to go to high school. Dad remarried in about 1.5 to 2 years after Mother passed away, and he married Mickey Powers, who lived across the street. She was an English teacher, and Mickey moved into our home and made a lot of changes, and Mickey wasn't quite accustomed to having kind of this wayward 12, 13-year-old girl who had been on her own since she was about 4 and really wasn't going to take direction from anyone. So I prevailed and left Little Falls in 1974 after graduating from St. Benedict's. I've kept in contact with my family and have been very fortunate to have great relationships. That's it.
Thank you.